Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 101. I've got Max Borders, who's author of several books, including Underthrow and After Collapse. He also was the founder of an excellent conference called Voice and Exit, later known as Future Frontiers, which was one of many conferences that was a casualty of mass hysteria in 2020. We definitely want to, but that was a great event. I hope it comes back. How are you, Max?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, you tend to be more, first of all, let's start out. How did you become a libertarian?
I wouldn't even call myself a libertarian. And that's not to say that I don't share so many of the libertarian priors. I do. But to the extent that I do, let's just put it that way. It's real simple. I was 16 years old. I walked into class one day and my creative writing teachers came up to me and said, "Max, I want you to read this." And he put the Fountainhead in my hand, and that was it.
Wow.
So funny the name of your podcast, because it really, if I would not be sitting here if it weren't for Ayn Rand. It's just that simple.
Yeah, that's one way to start. Yes. And how quickly did you get through it?
I don't remember. Gosh, it took me a while. I mean, it was a slog, but I ate it and drank it like I didn't want it to be over. That's how much I enjoyed it and felt it in sort of infusing my very being, because it mapped onto instincts that I didn't know I had. And you might say, well, that's just adolescents are selfish and this and that, but it was much more than that. It was a feeling as if sort of psychologically and spiritually as if I had come home. Now I've developed in my old age, different paths, different intellectual pursuits and directions, but that core remains. I can't deny that.
Max, you've talked a lot about things that have gone wrong, but you have still have a lot of optimism. Where do you think you get, especially in your, in some of your writings, where do you think that comes from? What makes you optimistic about the future of liberty and the future of civilization?
I think it's half dispositional, okay, in the sense that I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I find when I try to maintain a basis of realism. I think everyone should do that. Like, let's look at the world squarely in the eyes, as it were, and see, or let's look at the world just as it is and regard it as such. Let's not try to be too Pollyannish. But ultimately, I think dispositionally, I'm an optimist in the sense that I think all of this falls along distribution curve of some sort that we probably don't have any kind of access to. But that when you just look at someone in the eyes and talk to them, most people are basically good, right? And a lot of the way we renounce our goodness is when we get into politics, when people want to get into politics in lieu of being good people or in lieu of being moral people. So I think, just anecdotally spending time with people, even people who differ from me politically, I find it's like, wow, we really do have a lot in common. The other thing is, I just believe in this human spirit when it comes to creativity, entrepreneurship, and innovation. There are so many people, brilliant people out there doing so many different brilliant things. And once you let that cat out of the bag, they're never going to stop. Like that's for a certain type of person, it becomes an obsession. There are the Steve Jobs types. There are the Satoshi Nakamoto types. There are the and he's got a lot of problems, but the Elon Musk types. These people are committed to finding ways to improve the world, and they make an obsession about it. And I don't think that that's ever going to go away. Even in the darkest times of living behind the Iron Curtain, there were people who were thinking and innovating in that context, and waiting for the explosion of liberation that happened circa 1989 through 91. So, yeah, I just believe in humanity. I don't know why.
Do you think, I do have to ask, how can we really know what motivates Satoshi, since he put a few things out there and then just disappeared? Unless you've got some theories on who you think Satoshi is.
Well, call it a hunch, but if you look at the way that Bitcoin is configured, the way that whoever this person is, Satoshi Nakamoto, was able to construct a system. Now, this is a really good question. This is an excellent question. Satoshi Nakamoto, you can get a window into their or his or her soul by looking at the products of his, her, or their labor, because it could have been a group. I think it could have been Hal Finney. It could have been Nick Szabo. All of these people had all of these ancillary conversations. They were part of a community where they shared this one thing in common, which is that they don't like fiat currency, right? They don't like the idea that there is this elite group that controls money, that is inherently corruptive. That is absolutely clear from all of the cypherpunk conversations. Okay. If you look at the people who were cited in the Satoshi white paper, people like Szabo, if Szabo wasn't one of them, Szabo was talking about this profound preference for property rights, right? Private property rights, preference for the common law over statute law, right? And that right there, because Nick Szabo is a legal philosopher, a legal theorist, and part of what he was interested in was the evolution of money. But the other thing he was interested in is the way societies are configured. How do you make laws? Laws made that are based on custom and local circumstances of time and place. That makes common law a very Hayekian phenomenon, a bubbling up based on circumstances where you adjudicate frictions between and among people. The idea is to get them back to a collaborative state rather than a friction state. That's the way common law works, and that's what's so brilliant about it. So you can find these precedents and these in different contexts, these lessons or wisdom that gets embedded and transmitted through time with the common law. Whereas with statute law, you get a bunch of these politicians, most of whom got where they are because they're sociopaths, right? And they're making all the decisions about what's right for the rest of society because they represent us in these deliberative bodies. Barring the Constitution itself, which is a form of statute, I acknowledge that. And I don't think the Constitution is perfect, but I think it's an incredible document that sort of sets the stage for a lot of good things. I see that someone like a Nick Szabo and thus also Satoshi Nakamoto would have been influenced by someone like Nick Szabo, has an embedded sense of morality. A morality of consent is baked into the Satoshi white paper. The way it works is an artifact of morality. And some people would try to argue with me on that, but I don't think it's arguable. There's just too much evidence to suggest that they influenced each other profoundly, and they were essentially crypto anarchists.
Yes, crypto anarchists. I like Mark Passio's definition when he says anarchy is not a system without rules; it's just a system without rulers. I think that's
beautifully said,
Passio. So, what do you what obviously you're optimistic about Bitcoin. What else out there is giving you optimism? Because yes, I think the unleashing of creativity is certainly a good thing, and I do wonder if the genie can be put back in the bottle. But sometimes I worry about that too. But what are some really positive trends you see right now?
Well, I think the positive trends go in cycles. Okay. So I think it's a series of S curves, of long S curves. I don't know if you appreciate what an S curve versus like there's an exponential curve, right? So people are fond of talking about exponential innovations. And I think at the end of the day, innovation can be exponential.
Yes.
But I think what we really get are S curves. So we get a plateauing for a while, and then we get another exponential turn, and then we get a plateau for a while. And that's the way it looks. S curves that are stitched together through time. So right now we're in kind of a lull. The hot, in terms of cryptocurrency, for example, there was a lot that was really hot. It was like a first proto-Cambrian explosion that happened, in between, say, 2011 and maybe 2017, when we had the first real crypto crash, where Bitcoin was still the big dog, and it still is, but led the way. And you saw this going into the dark times. What happens if you I don't know if you are a fan or appreciate evoking Ludwig von Mises, but von Mises had this idea of boom and bust cycles. Okay, this is a very Austrian economics kind of thing. And what we're seeing with these S-curve dynamics with the cryptocurrency space, it's a very young industry. It's only about 15 years old. What you're seeing in that space right now is a kind of a flat line. But while the flat line is going on, and this is the same in the sort of Mises boom bust cycles, it's in the recessions that all the good innovation is happening. What we see with the good times is the fruits or the product of those innovations, or the product of that entrepreneurship. And of course, you're going to see as well the shenanigans of the money printers and fiscal policy, where government's spending all this money. It's a very complicated state of affairs. But the idea that I want to bring about is that right now is the time where innovators are quietly working and nobody knows what's going on. So it doesn't look like anything's going on in the market, but the innovations are cycling and getting ready to come out. And I think we're going to see, on the other side of all this regulatory nonsense, on the other side of some of the, forgive my mouth, but bullshit that was going on during the Bored Ape period, where everybody was just into these trinkets and tokens, which really weren't fundamentally about the Satoshi ethos, which is that crypto anarchism. Those rules, setting up rules without rulers. Having an NFT of a Bored Ape, who gives a shit, right? Like, and okay, it's worth $1 million. Great. I don't know. But like, that is not the way. That's a sort of a divergent path of silliness. So your innovators go back to work. What are they working on? Well, they went and worked on DeFi for a while. DeFi was based on some of the DeFi stuff was based on bad assumptions. Some of it was centralized, as in the case of, FTX and things like that. And that goes against the entire ethos of the original crypto ethos. So I think what you're going to see, what I'm hoping to see anyways, people getting back to their roots, their crypto anarchist roots, which is, how can we lateralize relationships through cryptographic means such that we can collaborate and exchange without having to worry about trusting third parties that are untrustworthy? And all this Web3 nonsense, like we have seen from Sam Bankman-Fried and others, demonstrated that as soon as you introduce a third party, they're easily corrupted. So let's create systems that don't require trusted third parties, but instead function much more like Bitcoin does, which is distributed, censorship resistant, and so on. Figuring out those systems, whether they're communication systems, whether they're monetary systems, or whether they're governance systems, that's the future. The next Cambrian explosion is coming. I hope. There's my optimism again. Unless the powers that be win and scare the shit out of everybody, and everybody sells their coins.
Yeah. What are some things that give you optimism that aren't connected or related to crypto or blockchain?
Yeah. I'm cautiously optimistic about AI. Although that tends to be centralized systems. I think there's going to be competition among those large language models. I love using AI, even though it's got social justice messages baked into it left and right. I still use the crap out of it. It's just, I use it every day. And it has really increased my productivity. So I am pretty sanguine about AI. And so much so that but I also believe, and this is going to be an S-curve phenomenon too, that even if you increase the compute power of these large language models by 1,000 times, like some of these new ones are going to come online, purport to do 1,000 times more processing than, say, GPT-4, I think there's still there's going to be an S-curve. There's going to be less that we're going to get out of those same models. Just adding compute is not going to do so much. It's just going to, I think it's just going to smooth out some of the edges and add some things to make it less weird, because sometimes you get weird results. I'm also I am becoming increasingly optimistic about special economic zones and alternative governance systems. Now, you may have heard the story, discussed it on your show, I don't know, but I want to encourage readers to check out Prospera. Prospera being a special economic zone system that was set up in Honduras, okay? Prospera is one of the instantiations of what is known as the ZEDES law. ZEDES being the special economic zones legislation. When Honduras had a more conservative-leaning government, and I'm using the left-right continuum here, but bear with me. They had a right-wing government there for a while. They passed the ZEDES legislation, and now the left-wing populist government is in, and they don't like the ZEDES. It would be a very big mistake to chase them off. And they have baked into the law, if you shut us down, you're going to have to pay for it, right? So whether they honor that or not remains to be seen. So if they try to shut down Prospera, big mistake, because it's flourishing. They've got a lot of investment. They've got a lot of companies based there. It's based on the island of Roatan, which is off the mainland of Honduras. Okay, it's on this beautiful island. Like if I didn't have kids and share custody of them and have to live in the United States, I would be living in Roatan right now, because it's the freest patch of soil on earth, except for the surrounding, Honduran government that is threatening to come in and mess everything up. It's promising. It's a new Hong Kong. That is an object lesson, I think, that we can take with us for new experiments in governance. If we are able to find, there's Free Private Cities, which is Titu Scable's nonprofit that advocates for these private cities, where you have tiny greenfield and you say, hey, we just want this little patch of soil. We want to be able to operate a governance system by contract. We contract with the people who live there. If we dishonor that contract, we go to an independent court system to settle our disputes. Otherwise, we provide security, liberty, and property, life, liberty, and property, right? And to the extent that we fail to provide that, you'll see us in court. So the idea of a private city it's really strange to people, but we're showing that a set of rules or governance systems and the instantiation of those systems can be an entrepreneurial venture. And entrepreneurial ventures want to gain and keep customers. It doesn't seem like the state of California wants to gain and keep customers, because Texas and Arizona are taking all their customers, their citizens. So I'm hopeful about this. I started off in 2011 as helping out with the Seasteading Institute. I wrote a couple of white papers with the likes of those folks, and I really enjoyed that. But the prospect of settling on the sea is a lot working against it. And Joe Quirk, whom you should consider having on the show, who leads the Seasteading Institute, makes no bones about this. But man, he is dogged in his determination to start to see this stuff happen. And right now, I think there's a project on the outskirts off the coast of Panama that is successfully starting up in little bits, but it's very marginal. They're being very marginal in their approach. They're not like, we're going to build a massive city on the sea, and I could see some like Korean conglomerate trying to build a city from scratch rather than have it being growing organically on the ocean. In any case, seasteading for me became a symbol of what's possible with human freedom. So even though there's not, seasteading isn't like going gangbusters 15 years later, it is sort of like a symbol. If you think about John F. Kennedy in his 61 speech at Baylor, somewhere in Texas, where he talked about, we're going to put a man on the moon. They hadn't done it yet.
Yes, landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth before this decade is out was his words.
Yeah, well done. See, that became a symbol of the possibility of government largesse and technocracy, sadly. And it worked. So people think, oh, well, government can do anything, right? Now, it turned out to be a really costly international pissing contest between the Russians and the Americans. And all it gave us really was bragging rights, and hastened the advent of the space era. So it's arguable about what is the aggregate benefit to humanity of that space program. But there were a lot of bad decades in there where it was just a waste of money, where they were chasing good money after bad, right? In any case, it became a symbol of what is possible with technocracy. And I think seasteading was a symbol for what is possible with alternative governance systems. If those don't end up on the sea first, they end up on land like Prospera or like some of these other ventures that are out there, that's okay. It's just, it's about finding space for experimentation and governance and competitive governance. I'm very optimistic about that.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said there. I just wonder how, what happens if somebody decides to move in and, take them out. But yeah, that's, since we've been talking about, smart cities and stuff like that, what do you think about some of the various things like the Free State Project or Monte Libero, which is the same thing, which is basically libertarians moving to Montenegro and doing what they're doing in New Hampshire. Do you think those have a chance to take off or not?
I don't know, but bless them. I just say Godspeed. We got to try any and everything. Let's keep throwing stuff against the wall and see what sticks. There are going to be success stories and there are going to be failures. And if, just like anything else, 80% of these experiments are going to fail.
Yeah.
So, but 80% of restaurants that get started fail. So it's like, we can't just, and this is what the statist factions are going to do with all this stuff. They're going to say, look, you couldn't do it, right? You couldn't do it. All government has to be a product of conquest and taxation. It's like, no, yeah. I don't think that is true. We're just going to have to see what works. There's all sorts of conditions that, are going to push back against some of these efforts. Montenegro is going to have its own population. Maybe they're not going to want to feel colonized by all these digital nomads and all this kind of stuff. You may have, you're going to have, you have popular pushback by the Hondurans, against Prospera, because they see all of these foreigners coming in and building all these beautiful buildings and starting all these businesses, and there's so much activity. And more, once these start getting profitable, they're going to start becoming dependent on the income stream that comes from Prospera. It's going to go directly to the central government. That is a pragmatic trade-off. Ideally, you wouldn't want to have to do that, but that's the deal they made in order to be able to start it. And it's relative to the rest of the world, that's a pretty good deal to operate your own social operating system outside of the corrupted laws of Honduras in exchange for a percentage of the income that comes in from these from these fees. And I don't know if they have an income tax or if it's just a Georgia land tax or what. I can't remember, but they're going to start seeing the income from this. And that's when they do, I think they're going to be less, everybody's going to be less excited about trying to kill the baby in the cradle with these kind of ventures. But the overall point to your question is we've got to iterate, we've got to experiment, and something's going to stick. And when those things stick, it's going to be an object lesson, just like we've made Dubai an object lesson, just like we made Hong Kong and Singapore, imperfect as they are, they're object lessons in what's possible for a small jurisdiction, usually either sitting on a rock or an island that becomes enormously prosperous because of good rules, good institutions.
Yeah, it seems like these only happen on a small scale. What are some other things more related to crypto that you're optimistic about? I mean, you certainly are very well versed in that area. I mean, are you I mean, maybe Cardano or maybe smart contracts or things like that.
Yeah, and I'm not legally allowed to give financial advice or investment advice.
This is not financial advice. This is not legal advice. This is not tax advice.
That's right. I have tokens I like. Some of them I think are more. Some of them are just investment plays, and some of them are more ideological investments. Call myself a Bitcoin mostly. Where a lot of people are Bitcoin maxis, I'm a Bitcoin mostly. Okay. And what I mean by that is my big fat investment pyramid scheme, if you like, is Bitcoin is the bottom layer of the pyramid. It's the basis. And then as you go up in risk, whether there's uncertainty about the technology or risks that they're going to be regulated in some way, I have less and less of it in my portfolio, but I still like to get something in there. And that is a diversification strategy that means I think a lot of Bitcoin, as the maxis do, but I don't call the other shit coins. I think Cardano is really interesting. I think Holochain, I've always thought that was interesting. And Holochain is one of those that I think is going to be like where others are tortoises. Ethereum is a tortoise, Holochain is a hare, right? They're just slowly building up this technological substrate that is some of the most brilliant computer science. And Chris, frankly, you could probably watch some videos on it and explain it better than I can. Particularly, it's been a while since I've gone down the rabbit hole of the technology. Suffice it to say, I was impressed. And it's not even built on a blockchain. It's built on a more sort of organic system. It's almost like if Bitcoin is more machine-like and masculine, Holochain is more feminine and organic. And they managed to achieve the same security results, but it is in some sense even more decentralized in the way it operates. So I encourage folks just to look into that just because it's really interesting technology. And the guys behind it are so freakishly brilliant. I couldn't possibly try to recreate even an overview of the technology, but I would encourage folks to look into it. There's some just good old stuff that I think is still evolving. Like the thing about all of these things is that whether it's a specific token associated with a specific blockchain, or you're talking about the entire ecosystem of tokens, we have both are evolutionary phenomena, right? So you can think of a token as being an evolving creature, and you can think of the entire ecosystem of tokens as being an evolutionary ecosystem. And so if things are constantly changing and adapting, how does that compare to the fiat money system? How does that compare to governance of our governance systems that we currently have, path dependence on? It's not even close. So even if you hear bad stories, FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt about crypto, right? The underlying technology is not going away. The mistakes that are being made are being fixed in real time. Compare that where an army of coders can go in and fix something in a day, versus how long it takes to repeal the Jones Act of 19 whatever the hell it was, 1919. It's still with us. 1918?
1920, I believe. But yeah, because I just had somebody on here talking about Hawaii.
Right. Yeah. That's why it's on my mind too. It's impossible. Like, these special interests accrete around these old social technologies, and our feedback loops of election cycles every 2 years or every 4 years are just so low res. And the feedback loops are just to appoint the sociopaths that are meant to fix them, and then blur their preferences together. Like, you couldn't dream up a stupider system of government, right? I mean, like, when you really think about how things change in the technology or the open source space compared to the way we do governance in Congress, it's just that alone makes me optimistic.
Yeah, I think the one thing is that sometimes it's very hard for these old systems to die. They manage to linger around for so long, and we've also watched how I've seen things that I was very optimistic about get completely and subverted for evil. I didn't think. Actually, in a strange way, I can remember thinking back when the antitrust persecutions were being led against Microsoft, and I just thought to myself, going into this, he never employed a single lobbyist. What happens when he starts lobbying? Oh my! And I never imagined it would be as horrible as it is.
It turned him into a monster.
Yeah, it turned. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And sometimes it makes me wonder too. Maybe if you have a true free market, but I'm starting to ask myself: is every Henry Reardon eventually going to turn into an Orrin Boyle? Is every capitalist eventually going to start to want to try to rig the system? Maybe just because he can.
There's a Nobel laureate named Douglas North you may have heard of or read.
I've heard of Douglas North, yes.
Yeah. He's a brilliant man. And he basically has it, and he says this in his Nobel speech, and I'm paraphrasing. I can't recall the quote exactly, but it's something to the effect of, if your institutions are configured in such a way that incentivizes corruption, you will get piracy or predation. Okay? If your institutions are configured in such a way that incentivize creativity, entrepreneurship, and innovation, you're going to get more Steve Jobs. Do you want pirates? More Steve Jobses. Because that's kind of the choice set with the institutional substrate. Because incentive systems shape people. There's a vacillating tandem between, and I'm not saying it's absolute. I'm just saying it's strong influence. The institutions shape us. Just think about the idea of moral practice for a moment. And this, even Ayn Rand and, the Randian folks would agree that, she had this idea about brotherhood and charity that I think is right. And the idea is essentially this: virtues have to be practiced. Okay. But if you have a set of institutions that discourage the practice of charity and a sense of brotherhood or fraternity or whatever, sororal arrangements, it's the same thing. And just like the brotherhood of man idea of community, of charity, of looking after each other. If you outsource that to a distant capital, you think you're going to get more of it or less of it? You're absolutely going to get less of it. So you're going to get less of the virtue, and especially less of the practice of the virtue. And that is destroying society. So when you made the thing about Hank Rearden turning into the other character's name?
Orrin Boyle from Atlas.
Orrin Boyle from Atlas Shrugged. Right.
Since you've read The Fountainhead, I assume you've read Atlas Shrugged. But
I have read Atlas Shrugged. I just I don't remember the names of all the characters. I remember Francisco d'Anconia. And anyway, point is, the point is though, it with freedom comes responsibility, but with freedom comes moral practice too. And with politics, we outsource that. People have come to think that morality is a political platform. That's just crazy. That's just crazy to me. And it makes me sound old fashioned, but like, this is one of the things that kind of just like pisses me off. I just put out an article today on my Substack called "Of Being and Barn Raising." Okay. And it's a little excerpt from one of my books. But the idea is like, barn raising didn't used to be a thing that was just among the Amish and the Mennonites. That used to be a thing that everybody did because we were an agrarian society, more or less, especially in the South. You can hear my accent that I'm from the South. And somebody's barn burned down. Everybody turned up the next day, cleared away the ashes, and built another barn. And they had it done in a day or two. And the reason that you did that was your insurance policy, was community. It incentivizes self-organization and moral practice. Politics does exactly the opposite. It encourages you to be a rabid partisan and not to do anything at all except, oh, well, I pay my taxes and I support my party. That's the extent of your charitable instinct at that point. And I think so much of our society is degenerating because of that. You know, 120 years ago, 1 in 3 Americans was a member of a mutual aid society, was an empire of good. We just don't do that anymore. Why don't we do it anymore? Because I pay my taxes, you know?
Yeah, I did a show with David Beto about that.
Oh, he's brilliant. I get all my good information from him on that.
Yeah, the mutual aid societies are definitely something out there that you look at. You know, Max, I do wonder, you know, talking about, you know, I like that term, you know, I'm a Bitcoin mostly. And you know, I don't know how much you've hung around them, but the orthodox Bitcoiners of today sound a lot like the orthodox objectivists 30 years ago. I mean, the tone and attitude is almost, I mean, obviously the words aren't the same, but the tone, the attitude is almost exactly the same. I don't know if you've noticed that, but it's wild to listen to it and to see it happen. Yeah.
I think that I think there's, look, let me I don't want to disparage that. I agree. I think I agree with the subtext of your question, which is I'm okay being a Bitcoin mostly, not a Bitcoin.
Yeah. I'm just wondering. I wonder. I guess I don't want to see. Okay, I don't want to see Orthodox Bitcoiners end up like ARI is now.
Right. Exactly. And that's but that's okay. But I actually think that Bitcoin maxis serve a useful function.
Yeah.
And that's at the scale of all the community of crypto and just general communication, which is like they're the fundamentalists, they're the evangelists, and their zeal can be effective at bringing people in and reminding and bringing us back to that moral core that I believe Satoshi imagined, which is to create a condition of consent where our relationships are consent-based, not imposed.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that there is value in that. Now they do have all this stuff about, oh, that's a shit coin and this and that. And that's okay. Look, I just remind them to say, look, today's shit coin might be tomorrow's disruptor. So don't don't ever discount the next Satoshi coming along and creating something new or better, right? And some people think that that's going to be, why can't I remember his name? Vitalik Buterin. I think Vitalik is brilliant.
Ethereum, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know that. I don't think Ethereum is necessarily going to be that. But Ethereum is constantly evolving. Bitcoin itself is constantly evolving. There is a stable equilibrium that they're going to try to achieve. But just the fact that they had to build the second layer in the Lightning Network onto Bitcoin lets us know that it had to evolve to accommodate certain things, namely the scaling problem of the original Bitcoin, because these guys didn't want to increase the block size limit. Right? The point is not the technical specifications around all this. The point is there's no sense picking a team. It's all a team to varying degrees. Like it's like, let's continue to figure out how to architect systems where we can lateralize relationships with each other and protect those lateral relationships to screw the man.
I think sometimes it's like Linux distributions also, where you just have all these Linux distributions stealing ideas from each other. The competition is a good thing, and one of the best things about crypto is that, I mean, if you fly with American Airlines and you ask a flight attendant how long you've been with American, half of them will tell you, well, I actually didn't start with American Airlines. I got started with this airline, and then they got bought, and then they got bought. That doesn't happen with crypto. There's no way that that Bitcoin can just say, oh, we're going to buy up Ethereum and make Ethereum disappear. There's always going to be competition.
Yeah. It's like there's a term in the 90s that I really liked and it needs to come back. Co-opetition, right?
Yeah.
So there are elements of competitiveness and there are elements of cooperation, and they needn't be mutually exclusive. In some cases, they are. A dollar I divest in order to purchase Bitcoin is not a dollar I can use to purchase Ethereum. But there are definitely areas in which I might find Ethereum much more functional and useful in some domain, and Bitcoin functional and useful in another domain. Because really, what these guys are doing, these developers, they're manifesting properties, and different properties are useful for different contexts. Sometimes the trade-off between security and scalability is one that people are willing to take. Now, Bitcoin Maxi would say that's just crazy. But, before Lightning, you had to make that trade-off. You had to see that's, and as things change, you got to keep up with the pace of change, and you've got to see that the ecosystem is evolving and the species within the ecosystem are evolving too. That's the point. Don't ever forget that. That's what I would say to the Bitcoin Maxis.
Yeah. Max, I don't know if you've read that one book by James Dale Davidson and Lord William Rees-Mogg, but they say
sovereign individual.
Yes, they say that we're eventually going to get to this point where all governments have to treat people like customers. Do you think we're moving toward that?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Okay. For two reasons, and I hope you'll allow me to shamelessly plug something. Two things, actually. First, I want to shamelessly plug my book, Underthrow.
Yes. Underthrow, yes.
The essence of this idea is the subtitle is How Jefferson's Dangerous Idea Will Spark a New Revolution. What's dangerous? What's the dangerous idea? It was in the Declaration of Independence. It's called the consent of the governed.
Yeah.
That is the philosophical basis of exactly what you're talking about, of markets and governance. To be able to select your governance system, right? Instead of having it be imposed on you. I, of course, love Lysander Spooner, and Spooner gets a mention in this book. But Spooner was right. I never signed that constitution. I never signed that multilateral contract. Don't talk to me about social contracts unless you mean it. And we can form an a social architecture of contracts that are that allow, I believe, will allow us also to underthrow power. Underthrow is the peaceful version of overthrow. Overthrow is violent, taking down power through violence. Underthrow is taking down power through peace, entrepreneurship, and innovation. Peaceful means more like Gandhi than like the French Revolution. Off with their heads.
Or maybe you could say how we took power away from Sears and gave it to Amazon.
We did. That's right. And hopefully someday we'll take it away from Amazon too.
And you have to be a certain age to understand just how big Sears was at one time. And they had a fantastic model for the time.
They did. And look, and Amazon's got some amazing network effects. Yeah. And we're willing to put up with a lot of garbage for all the benefit that we get from Amazon. I give them so much of my salary. It's not even funny. I'm sure you do as well. But yeah, that's exactly right. If we can start to think of governance, it sounds kind of gauche at first. People are like, what? Markets and governance? You mean we should be customers, not citizens? Yeah. Absolutely. If you start to think of that your governance service provider has to give you good customer service, that means they have to show up better than the DMV.
Yes.
And at least the DMV has 50 other alternatives. The U.S. federal government doesn't really have any alternatives except Canada. And that's even worse, right?
Especially I think we'll get to a point Trudeau. Where maybe people just get to a point where they, it is a case where you just pick your government and then this government go bankrupt. I will confess, I often shop on Amazon, but if I see, that's this company, then I go to their website and buy from them directly. But yeah, I understand. Certainly books and media, I certainly buy at Amazon because that's, in fact,
I'm glad you do, because that's, they've got me. I sell all my books through Amazon and Amazon.
Oh yeah. After my one move, I said, look, why do I have all these books? It's they're just such a nightmare to have. It's I'll go buy the Kindles or buy the ebooks.
And, my office here is just the books all around me. So I get it.
The books I have left are mostly just books that I would not be able to find, that I really wouldn't be able to find.
Yeah.
Elsewhere. So, and unfortunately, there are a lot of books like that, unfortunately, but yes.
Well, before we move on from this idea of markets and governance, I know you're going to have, it could be you, but it could be one of your extra smart listeners. Okay. We're running a contest right now. Me and a group of, an entrepreneur out of Singapore, is funding part of it. We've got, a Bitcoin enthusiast who kicked in another $5,000. So we have $25,000 in prizes for the Constitution of Consent contest. Okay. And I want your listeners to enter this contest. I want somebody to win the $20,000 grand prize, or at least the $3,000 second place or $2,000 third place. And what this is just that. What would a constitution look like that would facilitate governance systems, alternative governance systems that we can choose? Just what we're talking about. This is known as, and bear with me, there's different iterations of this idea. Panarchy is the first. A Belgian liberal named Dupuy has this idea of panarchy, and you can read his 1860 paper called Panarchy. Another that you might be familiar with is the philosopher Robert Nozick in part 3 of Anarchy, State, and Utopia, has this idea called the Framework for Utopia, a utopia of utopias, which means there's no utopia at all. So there's no one true way to govern, right? The idea is the more pluralism there is, the more polycentricity there is, where polycentric law just means many centers of law, the more options you have. And this goes back to the old idea of federalism being a simplified version of all this. So what I'm trying to evoke here, and man, I can tell you what, in promoting this contest, I really pissed off a lot of MAGA people because they sacralize the U.S. Constitution the way it is. And to some extent, they're right. If we could enforce the Constitution as it is, we wouldn't need to even think about this. But never mind. I'm trying to change minds and help people upgrade their sensibilities on these matters to get us more where you just described, which is governance choice sets. Okay. A menu of governance options. So you can go to your listeners can go to underthrow.org, and in the nav bar it says contest. Click on contest, and it'll give you everything you need, guidelines, rules, everything to enter the contest and go for winning that $25,000. The guidelines, I give you a sort of 25 suggestions, but really the basic 5 are in another article that I can send you, and you can put in your show notes if you like. It's really about the critical feature of this is what are the myriad ways we can build in choice or consent of the governed. That's really the essence of this concept. That's why we call it the Constitution of Consent contest. If Jefferson could have architected a constitution instead of Madison and Hamilton, what would it have looked like? That's the question. The winners will get that much money.
That's a very interesting idea. I definitely would. When I think about anarchy, I realize that the perfect example of anarchy is math. Everybody in math accepts that 1 + 1 = 2. The square root of 9 is 3, and it works. You have rules, but you don't have any rulers. So, do you think there's a way to get to that with everything else?
Yeah, I've asked myself this question. My boss is an anarchist, like full-on anarchist.
Oh,
I consider myself an asymptotic anarchist. So speaking of math, if you think about an asymptote as being a curve that approaches an axis
yes.
or a line, it may never actually get there. It just gets closer and closer. The reason I call myself an asymptotic anarchist is because aspirationally I'm an anarchist, because that would mean the complete removal of coercion and threat of violence from all human relationships. That is the moral goal for me, right? And I think it brings along with it so many beautiful ancillary effects, secondary, tertiary, and ancillary effects. But ultimately, the goal is to create a consent-based order, and that would be anarchy. However, I also am under no illusions. We are living in a situation where all around us are these Leviathan powers, and power has strong incentives to keep hold of the ring, of Sauron's ring, right? So what are we going to do about that? We do what we can as subversive innovators to bring about underthrow. We keep on trying to find constituencies of the good who can join in moral community with us and figure out how to innovate around power. And we get closer and closer all the time. But we also have to change minds. So this Constitution of Consent contest is a way of getting people to think outside of the Leviathan box, outside of this idea of the state as being the only way. I mean, even some Randians think, and maybe they're right, that you just have to have a minimal state. And I just say that debate is merely academic. If we can all be asymptotic anarchists, we all try to figure out, given the circumstances of time and place, how to make humanity freer and how to continuously adopt institutions that allow us to be freer and introduce this consent and competition concept, we're going to get closer and closer to the goal. That's the way I frame things. I no longer participate in any of these debates about it should be a minimal state. It should be an anarchist situation. It's like, that's silly. There's never going to be a constitutional moment where we go, we're going to create anarchy or we're going to create a minimal state. And it's,
Yes.
it's that.
I so often wonder if political involvement is really the way to go, whether it be through political parties running for office, or even in some cases through nonprofit think tanks. I, it seems it seems like maybe the Bitcoiners are accomplishing more. I mean, I don't know what you think about that, and maybe just because of where the incentives are.
Oh, I not only agree with you, I've built the last 15 years of my career around that idea. And
Yeah,
let me put it like this. I call it politics, policy, and punditry.
yeah,
Those are the three boxes that everyone wants to operate in. Politics, policy, and punditry. Good luck with that. You're going to beat your head against the sides of those boxes. I say unleash creativity, entrepreneurship, and innovation. Satoshi Nakamoto has done more for humanity than Ron Paul. Now, Ron Paul, love the man. I think he's amazing, and I think he did a lot of good. But he was a communicator, a leader for a set of ideas. It really wasn't the practice of politics that made Ron Paul a great man. It was his ability to communicate and form constituency groups around a set of ideas. That is why he was powerful. He was powerful as an orator, as a figurehead. Satoshi Nakamoto is a subversive innovator. And I agree with you. Like, I'm ready to let go of politics, policy, and punditry. Not that I don't care who wins the presidential election or who runs and all this stuff, but that horse race politics is just it's such a spectacle of nonsense. And it's designed almost to keep people engaged in the spectacle so that the powers that be can go on and act with impunity and give us the illusion that we participated in a process. All we've done is cried our teardrops in the ocean, and we expect the tide to turn, and it never does.
But if you've hung around in those circles, you know that Ron Paul and Ayn Rand are highly regarded among the Bitcoin and crypto communities.
No doubt.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about. I mean, look, I'm a pundit.
Yeah.
So like one of the things I do is I write things about politics. I write things about political theory. That makes me a pundit. I'm in one of those boxes a lot of the time. If I could do it over again, I'm almost 50 years old. If I could do it over again, would I be a software developer? Would I be an entrepreneur? Someone like Bob Luddy of North Carolina, who has created a series of these franchise schools called Thales Academy. Thales Academy, the Thales Academy franchises are growing around the country, around the Southeast, like a cancer on the public school system. Despite the fact that they don't get any government largesse, despite the fact that each school operates at a full third of what, on a per pupil basis, of what the government schools run on. And people rate them 5 stars left and right. It costs $5,500 a year to send your child to a Thales Academy. That's about, I want to say $600 a month, $700 a month. That is affordable. That is true disruptive innovation in the Clayton Christensen sense. That is someone who said, I don't care what the status quo is. We're going to do this. We're going to go straight into the headwinds of the state. Whatever the teachers' unions have to say, whatever the politicians have to say, I'm going to do this privately. And man, they're just growing like wildfire because people are fed up with the same old with the public schools. There are my shtick, Chris, since you bring it up, that's my shtick, man. It's like what I want to communicate more than any other thing is go forth and be an entrepreneur. Figure it out. We need an army of Satoshis out there. We need 10,000 Satoshis out there doing something. It doesn't have to be Bitcoin. It can be anything. It can be creating a school franchise. It can be writing a piece of code. It can be creating, communicate cryptographically protected communication software. It can be going and starting a new governance system on a green field and on the island of Roatan in Honduras. Whatever it is, innovators for freedom is the way. I call it subversive innovation.
Or space travel. I don't know if you're familiar with Matt Erickson of the King Pilled podcast, but I remember he said something, and I'm paraphrasing. He said, if arguing with people like Nick Sarwark and Archie Flowery is your strategy for liberty, you need to find something better to do with your time.
Beautifully said. I think I know Matt. He's a smart guy. He's got some real detailed legal stuff on how to reform to get us back to relaunch the Constitution. And I've had to spend a lot of time with it. But that guy's brilliant. And he's
there's a couple guys with that name out there though, but I don't know yet.
Okay. I don't know if it's the same person. But my Matt Erickson is brilliant, but apparently this one is too, because that's dead right. I mean, I would even say I used to say there's no bigger waste of time than getting involved in libertarian politics. I don't say that anymore. And I'll go back to the thing about Ron Paul. The Libertarian Party can produce the next Ron Paul. The Libertarian Party can produce the next Spike Cohen. Someone who's just an amazing communicator who moves human souls. People look at him and go, wow, that's something. This person has something to say. I want to know more, right? They're never going to win any elections except maybe the mayor of some podunk town, or you might get a congressman somewhere here and there. And look, I'm not trying to disparage the LP. I know you've been involved in the LP. But like, I do think that people can run for major offices, get on a debate stage, and start to share ideas through those means. So I wouldn't want to disparage involvement in the LP, the internecine politics of the LP, just like every other politics. So ugly, sausage making. But like the idea of having someone emerge who is able to really connect with people. I think about people like Larry Sharpe. I don't know if you know about Larry Sharpe. He's out of New York, ran for governor of New York. Like, he's never probably going to win in a gubernatorial contest, but my God, that man can communicate. He's something else. He might come across as a little strident or weird to the ear of your conventional Republican or Democrat, but he is, to me, is an exemplar of that communicative faculty, just as Spike Cohen is, just as there are others. I don't know how that ever happened, but
Yeah, well, and of course we also have another man in Argentina who is possibly going to win the presidency. That might be something new and innovative that we see happen. It's definitely it's a great story. So where do you what do you think of? Do you think, sometimes though, and I've noticed people get into this where they're not thinking about politics, but then politics starts coming after them anyway. There were a lot of people in Poland in June of 1939 that weren't really thinking about politics, but then suddenly politics showed up at their door a few months later. Can we necessarily ignore politics?
No, absolutely not. I think if you think of it as like the distribution of talents, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so some people are just cut out for politics. Some people are just, they, in my mind, represent a bulwark against the advance of power and authority in the political system itself. So I'm not trying to disparage that, except I want to cherry pick the innovators. I want to pick them out and reposition them. I want to inspire people enough to think outside of the 3 Ps, politics, policy, and punditry, if they're better suited to, for example, be in creativity, entrepreneurship, and innovation. Right? Like, I think about this guy, Vivek Ramaswamy. Okay. He used to self-identify as a libertarian. He's now more, he positions himself as more like a closeted libertarian with a MAGA exterior. He's an interesting guy. He's a little bit cheesy and polished and, gleaming smile, and has but his facility to explain things in these little bursts and little anecdotes, stories, arguments, and I have criticisms of him. Don't get me wrong, but what's
Yeah.
interesting about that guy is that he came out of the entrepreneurship space. That whether and to what extent he's better suited as a politician remains to be seen. He's certainly positioning himself that way. He may be one of these people who's just who can do anything. He's just that brilliant. I mean, he's Yale educated. He's probably got an IQ of 160, and he can just frickin' do everything under the sun. But most people can't. Most people are terrible at politics who are good at entrepreneurship, and most people who are good at entrepreneurship are terrible at politics. Never the twain shall meet. He might be an exception to that. But I wonder if he could take that acumen, that business and innovation acumen, after all of his presidential stuff, which seems like a hell of a big strategic move that's working to some degree, and reposition himself as a subversive innovator in the next phase of his life. Where would he be more effective? I can't say.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us knows. I know for me, I tried entrepreneurship, but I'm too much of a visionary. And if I ever do an entrepreneurial venture again, I'm going to need an implementer. I'm going to need a CEO who kicks ass to team with, because, it's like that book Jet Fuel. If you don't have the visionary and the implementer together, then you're likely to fail.
Well, there was that other book. There was that other book that I think it was Bajoy. The bootstrap Boston guy wrote. He said you need the maven and something else.
Mater, relator, and salesman, or maven, relator, evangelist. Yeah.
Yeah, and
that's the head, heart, gut triad.
Yeah, or as I like to use the analogy of Steve and Steve Jobs and Wozniak. I mean,
right on.
Steve Jobs would go out and do the commencement speeches and go on TV and talk about things, and Woz just wanted to, he would have been contented staying in the basement for his whole life, just tinkering with stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't think one succeeds without the other.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm glad you mentioned the Jet Fuel book is the simplest version of that, but that does omit the relator. I think the relator is an important. It makes three legs of the stool. If you can find in a young company that might be like a marketing or salesperson who just knows how to go out and break bread and schmooze with people and establish relationships and talk it up. An implementer is often a leader who just powers through, gets things done. And then the visionary is the maven, right? That's the person who's got the big picture idea, but once you get down to the details, starts to suffer from implementation problems. So if you have all three of those on a founding team, I think you really increase your odds of success. That's a great point, Chris. And thanks for bringing up Bijoy. I haven't talked to him in, almost a decade, but that's a brilliant guy.
Yeah, there's a lot of brilliant people out there doing a lot of amazing things. It's going to be a great world. So yeah, so you've got Underthrow, After Collapse, or you have some other books out there too, or are those the only two so far?
No, I've got my most successful book is The Social Singularity from 2018. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to beat that book. It's just gone gangbusters by comparison. People love that book. It's for some reason, and I love it too. But obviously, I always want my newest book to get more eyeballs than The Social Singularity. But I've got that one. I've got After Collapse. The Decentralist is my 2021 book. Or 2022 rather. After Collapse was 2021. 2022 is the decentralist. The decentralist is subtitle is Mission, Morality, and Meaning in the Age of Crypto. And that book was really a call where the social singularity is about systems, how we can decentralize all the systems. This is really, and that's an external book. The Decentralist is more of an internal book. Like, how do we re-embrace the morality that that the moral systems that give rise to centralization? How can we practice the virtues again? Practice nonviolence, not just talk about it, right? Practice integrity. Practice. There's a whole chapter on the practice of these virtues called the 6 spheres. But it's also, I also mentioned the head, heart, gut triad and Bijoy Goswami because that is, I want to really, that book is dedicated to cultivating the ethos of the subversive innovator. Go out there and kick ass, change the world. Here are the things that you need to become that person, to go from the aspirational self to the realized successful self, through the lens of decentralization and through the lens of this doctrine of consent versus coercion.
We never brought it up, but obviously, when I think about collapsing institutions, the top of the list also comes to our whole college and our schools. Do you think those are institutions that can ever really be made to work? Because I'm pessimistic, just because I don't know. I think they attract a certain personality.
I think they can work again, but I think they're gonna look very different from the kind of, they resemble a medieval guild right now, or cartel, right? They're cartelized, and the extent to which subversive innovators in higher education can come along and come up with new models, I think that's possible. There's one out of New Hampshire, this fellow named Nathaniel Green, I think his name is, who has designs on creating a university that competes with the Ivies, in the sense he wants to attract the brightest students. But they're not going to be anywhere. There's not going to be like this ivory tower place where you congregate and everything. They're going to actually, they're going to travel, and they're going to meet in these, going to do a lot of it online, but they're also going to meet in these different areas and educate themselves based on contextualizing themselves in the world. And, whether the model works, I can't say. He's got to launch first and see. But if he can attract students to this, another is Praxis. You may know about Praxis.
You've heard of them, yes.
Yeah. Praxis is a model where it's basically you get this sort of really fundamental education in entrepreneurship and marketing and the basic philosophy of being an entrepreneur, like a little mini MBA, I guess you could say. But then they quickly place them as not interns, but what's the word? Apprentices. They give them apprenticeships in startup companies. So they get to work in the belly of the beast and see how the world works, see how business works. And man, they attract really smart students. And I'm connected with a lot of these Praxis alums now who never went to college, but they're out there in the world doing amazing things. Hannah Frankman is one of them. You may have seen Hannah Frankman. She's got her own podcast now.
Yeah, I know who she is.
Yeah, she's into alternative education, and that's her shtick, man. And she's doing great stuff. Another is a guy who just started John Galt Mortgage Company. So I think he was a Praxian, a Praxis graduate. So yeah, I think higher education is going to evolve, but it's got to evolve or it's going to die, because the current system we have now, the guild that protects itself and adds all this, uses largesse from all the cross subsidies to create this top heavy administrative system and all the social justice rancor that sort of poisons those institutions. I think that's just going to get worse before it gets better. And people are just going to do what Bob Letty did in the Southeast and create alternative, cheap private schools that kick their ass all over the place. More and more of that's going to happen in higher ed too.
I think what a lot of the fear is in the world is that the bad guys are going to get control of everything before the good guys can figure out a way to subvert it. But there are always hackers who are always breaking into the systems. But I don't know if it's going to get easier or harder to do that.
Yep.
And sometimes I wonder. Sometimes you think maybe that's just what motivates some of these entrepreneurs. It's like, well, like Roger Bannister, everybody said I couldn't run a mile in 4 minutes. Well, guess what? I'm running a mile in 4 minutes. It's just this thought of doing something that everybody said you couldn't do.
Well, and here's the way I would put it to people, because I hear this all the time. People are saying, "Oh, it's never going to work. What you're saying is never going to work. It's just too much power out there." Right? They're too powerful. The authorities, they have us by the short and curlies. I hear this constantly. And I'm like, you know what? You don't have a choice but to be optimistic. If you lapse into that nihilism, even if you're right, even if at the end of the day, what unfolds is a dystopian century of authoritarian rule based on a technological surveillance state. And it looks like we're heading in that direction. But if you accept that in your nihilism and become solipsistic and negative, you'll never inspire anybody to get anywhere, and we will never win. You have to believe. You have to.
How important do you think good creative work, good art is to all this? Say good novels, whether it be comic books or music or movies or TV shows or
essential.
Yeah.
Essential. I sometimes pick on libertarian types for being too left-brained, because there's a tendency of libertarians to be very left-brained, very engineering-oriented, and so on. And so the libertarian creative, the artist, the fiction writer, the actor, director, filmmaker, like, they tend to be rarer among libertarians compared with, say, the left. And I find that pretty unfortunate. But I also know that I also believe it doesn't have to be that way. So just like we cultivate subversive innovators, which is my shtick, I want people like John Popola to cultivate new filmmakers, and that be his shtick, right? Or put it another way, there's this guy named Pete Betke, who is a professor of economics at George Mason.
Yeah, Peter Betke. Yeah, he used to be at NYU. He's long been an Austrian.
Yeah. And his whole thing is like, he wants to mint PhDs who will propagate Austrian economics. And he's succeeded in doing so. I think they're probably, no one can claim more PhD professors of the Austrian sort than Pete Betke, right? So we have to, and his whole thing is, he's a smart guy and he does his scholarship and all like this stuff. But his other thing is, he is a mentor of new Austrian economists. For one man to have that kind of impact, that's pretty awesome. Okay. But we need people to do that in subversive innovation space. We need people to do that in the arts and creative spaces. We need to do it across the board. And that's going to be harder for libertarians, because they tend to be like looking up from designing some sort of widget, or being a chemist or a physicist and going, I also happen to be a libertarian, but I'm a physicist. I'm a left brain guy. I do math, And I also see that as very promising for subversive innovation too, by the way, because you got a lot of libertarian coders out there. But yeah, we need to cultivate more artists, more fiction writers, more screenwriters, more filmmakers, all of the above.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great talk. Do you have anything else to say before we go?
Just that I want to reemphasize for your listeners to enter the Constitution of Consent contest. Give it some thought. Look at the guidelines. Do your best. You might win some money, and you can go and folks can go to underthrow.org to do it. Underthrow sounds weird. It's peaceful overthrow. That's what that means.
Yes, we've got a lot of, there are a lot of very interesting contests out there, and I think they generally breed better stuff. I hope we can keep these things going. Thank you for your optimism, Max. Please like the video, subscribe, give it a thumbs up, follow the channel. Check out my Substack at fountainheadforumsubstack.com. Get my novel, Escape from the Village. I'm Chris Baker, and we're out.